Hey guys, how's it going? So this week is UFC Fight Night Lewis versus Teixeira, and I'm going to run through the whole card and give you guys my picks and predictions for this one. So let's get straight into it. And kicking off the prelims, we have Fatima Kline versus Melissa Martinez. So Fatima Kline, only 2 fights within the UFC, with her debut being against a really tricky opponent in Jasmine Jasudavicius. She's one of the most dangerous fighters when it comes to her ground game and submissions. And in this fight, not only did Jasudavicius look good on the ground, where she dominated, almost submitted Kline in the 3rd round, but also on the feet for the short periods where it stayed there. She was also keeping it very competitive there. Won that one by a very clear decision. Fatima Kline went on to go fight Victoria Dudikova next, and that one she looked infinitely more improved. In the 1st round, she reversed Dudikova's takedown and then ended up on top, holding that position for the rest of the round. Was landing some good ground and pound here and there as well. And then in the 2nd round, she took Dudikova down herself and finished the fight with some brutal elbows, taking a ground and pound TKO in that 2nd round. Melissa Martinez, her opponent, also has only 2 fights within the UFC and is also 1-1, with her losing her debut against Elise Reed in a fight where she got knocked down early in the fight, and from there she was just really struggling to keep up with the volume of Reed. Combined with being taken down multiple points in the fight, it just led to her losing a unanimous decision. Following that, she won her 2nd fight against Alice Ardeline in a striking battle that she managed to take by unanimous decision through landing the bigger shots. But volume-wise, they were very even, and she took that one by a 30-27 decision through just inflicting more damage throughout the fight. Overall though, I think that the resume of Kline speaks a little better than Martinez's. And I think that she's a bit more well-rounded and will do a lot better in the grappling compared to Martinez's very heavy striking approach. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Fatima Kline by a decision win. Moving up the prelims, we have Mitch Ramirez versus Mike Davis. So Mitch Ramirez has a pretty unfortunate run in the UFC in terms of his opponents, with him fighting on the Contender Series against Carlos Prates, where he got put away early in the 2nd with a brutal straight, the classic sort of straight we see Prates throw. It put him down badly. He wasn't really out, but he was sort of not with it. So the ref jumped in and stopped the fight. When he did get into the UFC, he debuted up against Thiago Moises, who isn't the highest ranked fighter rankings-wise, but he is a very tough challenge, especially to debut against. And in this fight, he got out-wrestled in the 1st, outstruck in the 2nd, and then ultimately put away in the 3rd with leg kicks. Really bad performance to debut from Ramirez there. His opponent Mike Davis most recently took on Fares Ziam, a really good surging contender within the lightweight division. And in this fight, Ziam looked very dominant. He got a 30-27 decision. He won convincingly on the feet, while Davis would put up some resistance on the ground here and there. But ultimately, it wasn't really enough to overcome what Ziam was doing. Before that, he got a 2nd round submission over Natan Levy when he knocked Levy down very early in the 1st. And then the 2nd was able to lock in an arm triangle pretty easily to submit Levy. Not the hardest of competition. And then before that, he took on Vyacheslav Borshev, bit better there, but in that fight he won a 30-27 decision, mainly just through consistently taking Borshev down and remaining on top position, landing some decent ground and pound here and there, but I think it spoke more to Borshev's lack of takedown defense and lack of wrestling. But yeah, he won that one by a decision. And ultimately, I think in the striking, this fight will be pretty even, but Davies has that sort of advantage to carry him through the fight with his wrestling, and Ramirez isn't the best at defending takedowns, and he doesn't have an amazing grappling skill set. So I'm going to go with Mike Davis for this one. I'm going to say round 2 submission. Next up is Kennedy Nzechukwu versus Valter Walker. So Nzechukwu most recently took on Lucas Brzeski at UFC 310 in a fight where in the 1st round it was very competitive. It was a striking battle where both were sort of voluming the same amount. Nzechukwu landed a right hook very late in the round though, closing seconds, and then knocked Brzeski down, finished him with a TKO right as the round was about to end. Good finish there. A few fights before that, he did lose a split decision to Oven St. Peru, where he came out strong in the 1st, but as the fight went on, he sort of slowed down, especially in the striking, slowed down significantly. And in the end, it was Nzechukwu getting caught in the 3rd round and being knocked down that lost him that very close split decision. And while he is very skilled in the striking, I'm a bit worried about how open he leaves himself to being hit and finished. It was the case with Dustin Jacoby. In that fight, Jacoby landed a brutal counter right while being backed up against the cage. That dropped Nzechukwu and had the fight finished early with some follow-up ground and pound to win a TKO there. So I'm a bit worried about that. His opponent Valter Walker had a very impressive performance recently against Don'Tale Mayes, where almost instantly he took Mayes down, and when on the ground he easily found this opening for a heel hook, locked it in tight, submitted Mayes early in the 1st. And while you don't see heel hooks very often in the UFC, Valter Walker seems to have perfected them. He finished Junior Tafa the exact same way, 1st round with a heel hook. There was some confusion around the stoppage though. The ref jumped in, stopped it due to a verbal tap. Tafa screamed out in pain. The ref took that as a verbal tap, stopped it. Tafa got up, started complaining about the stoppage. Kind of controversial, but regardless, still a first round heel hook submission for Walker. And while recently we've seen Walker absolutely dominate his opponents, if he can't get his opponents to the ground, he'll more likely than not get beat in the striking. With his fight against Lucas Brzeski ending in a decision loss primarily just through Brzeski dominating on the feet, while Walker only really looked good with some takedowns and with some wrestling, but there wasn't really enough to overcome the striking difference with Brzeski taking a decision. And while I think that Walker will win this fight if it goes to the ground, especially early in the fight, if it stays on the feet for too long, I think Nzechukwu has a really good chance of picking this one up, and he also has some pretty good takedown defense and is able to often back his way to the cage without sort of staying on the ground for too long. So for that reason, I don't think Valter Walker will be able to sort of lock anything in early, and I could see this one going to the decision or late in the fight. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Kennedy Nzechukwu by around 3 KO. Up next is Lauren Murphy versus Eduarda Moura. So Lauren Murphy had been in the UFC for a long time now. She even was one of Valentina Shevchenko's defenses of the belt. But in that fight, she got absolutely brutalized. She got beat up badly on the feet. And in the 4th round, she got taken down and finished late in the round with some ground and pound. Shevchenko took a TKO win for that one, but regardless, probably would have got a 50-45, if not worse, for Murphy decision there. Following that, she picked up a very dominant win over Miesha Tate, where she was able to deal some real damage on the feet, landing the bigger shots of the fight, and mixed in some takedowns later in the fight to take a dominant unanimous win. However, in her most recent fight, she took on Jessica Andrade and lost really badly. Throughout the fight, she was just getting beat up badly and taking some real damage on the feet, and even being out-volumed by a factor of sort of 2 or more. And ultimately she lost that one by a 30-27 decision, really bad showing. Her opponent, Eduarda Moura, debuted in the UFC against Montserrat Ruiz, who's decent, and that performance was really good. She took Ruiz down early in the first, landed an insane amount of ground and pound. She dealt some really good damage, and in the second she did the exact same thing, but actually managed to put her away with some ground and pound midway through the round. However, following that win, she lost to Denise Gomez in a fight where Gomez was winning in the striking for the whole fight. Moura was keeping competitive at points with her takedowns and wrestling, but really didn't do enough to make a statement and take any of the rounds for certain. So she lost a split decision that I thought was a lot more clear towards Gomez, but either way, it was decently close at times. Most recently, she took on Veronica Hardy at UFC 309, where she took a unanimous decision win through taking Hardy down early in the fight. Early in the 1st and 2nd rounds especially, and holding dominant position for most of the rounds, with Hardy looking better in the striking but not really being able to let her hands go until that 3rd round, and ultimately it wasn't enough. Moura took that decision, and while I think Murphy's striking is going to present some issues with Moura, Murphy's the type of person to walk you down and take the damage to inflict some of her own. I think Moura's takedown game will neutralize a lot of the threat that Murphy presents on the feet, and will often, if in this case as well, I think, run the fight out to the cards. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Eduarda Moura by a decision win for this one. Next up is Jake Matthews versus Chidi Njokuani. So Jake Matthews, he's coming off a pretty unimpressive win against Francisco Prado at UFC 312. He did take a 30-27 decision, but it wasn't really as dominant as those cards would make you seem. There were close moments throughout that fight on the feet. Neither were really throwing anything of impact to sort of take around in favor of them. But Matthews just looked a bit better on the feet. He was struggling though at points with Prado's takedowns throughout the fight, especially early on, but ultimately it was Matthews' volume that won him that one. Before that, he had a much better performance against Phil Rowe in a fight that Matthews took some time to get into the fight, lost that 1st round on the judges' scorecards, but he actually picked it up as the fight went on and even threw some of his own takedowns and wrestling in the 3rd. Won that one 29-28 unanimous decision. Before that, he did get beat up pretty badly by Michael Morales in their fight. But this is the same Michael Morales that just recently put away Neil Magny, put away Gilbert Burns. And the fact that Matthews even made it to a decision, I think, is pretty impressive. And he even took the 1st round on the judges' scorecards. Came out very hot against this guy who is known for sort of finishing his fights early, or at least now he is. So yeah, he does have some sort of credit on his resume. Chidi Njokuani most recently took on Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos in a one-sided fight on the feet, with Njokuani utilizing his range to beat up on dos Santos, and ended up with Njokuani landing this brutal knee clean to the head of dos Santos, put him out badly, had that fight stopped. In his fight before that against Jared Gooden, that was another sort of showing of how skilled Njokuani is in the striking. But this time Gooden was putting up a lot more resistance with his takedowns and wrestling in the first and third rounds, almost submitting Njokuani in the final round. But ultimately it went to a decision. Njokuani took that one by a unanimous decision. And while his performance against Reese McKee was a split decision win, the only reason for that was some really weird scoring from one of the judges, and it was more realistically a Njokuani 30-27 than even an argument that McKee won, with that fight being a one-way traffic from Njokuani on the feet. So another really good win there, granted not against the hardest of opponents. And while I just talked up how good Njokuani's striking is, I think style-wise, Jake Matthews is going to be a tricky matchup. Matthews has a secret weapon in his pretty good takedown defense and his wrestling, and I think that will be used in this fight to sort of neutralize the striking threat from Njokuani. So I'm going to go with Jake Matthews by a decision win for this one. And closing out the prelims, we have Max Griffin versus Chris Curtis. So Max Griffin most recently had a really bad performance against a pretty average opponent in Michael Chiesa at UFC 310. In Michael Chiesa, this might be one of his few final fights, and in that fight, Griffin just let the fight run away from him. In the first 2 rounds, he wasn't really putting up much of a fight on the ground, and in the third, he just got his back taken and submitted with a rear naked choke, was losing it up to that point anyway. Before that, he went to a really close split decision against Jeremiah Wells, who once again isn't the hardest of opponents, and in that fight, each fighter had their round. Griffin won the second, Wells won the third, and it came down to a really close split sort of swing round in the first that Griffin just took, but very, very close. He did manage to make it to a decision with Michael Morales, who is incredibly dangerous. I just mentioned that before. And while he did come out pretty strong as the fight went on, he slowed down and got outperformed badly, losing a clear-cut unanimous decision there. Chris Curtis, coming off an unfortunate loss to Roman Kopylov in a fight that was sort of one apiece moving into the third, or at least that's how I had it scored. But in the third, Kopylov caught Curtis with a head kick in the closing seconds of the round that knocked Curtis down badly, had him sort of not completely out, but he wasn't really in the fight. Ref jumped in, stopped it with 1 second left, despite Curtis not really being completely out. And I sort of, while I had the third round scored towards Kopylov, it would have been a close decision either way. It was a very close fight. Unfortunate that it got stopped by KO. Before that, he lost a really close split decision again to Brendan Allen on short notice when they rematched, with Curtis winning 2 and 3 on my scoring. But in the 5th, he injured his leg against the cage, let Allen get some good hard shots in the closing seconds, beating on him while he's holding his leg. He lost that round, and I'd argue he would have won that one if he could take back that 5th, but in the last 30 seconds, he sort of let Brendan Allen take that one. Very close decision as well. And even before that, he went to a really close split decision against Marc-Andre Barriault at UFC 297, where by the time the decision rolled around, they were both so even in the striking every round that it was incredibly hard to score. But Curtis did look a tiny bit better, and 2 of the judges even gave him a 30-27, so while it was a split decision, I'm not screaming a robbery that he won. And while Curtis's recent fights have left me a little bit uncertain with the close split decisions he's been going to recently, I think that against an opponent like Max Griffin, who relies primarily on sort of striking with him, Chris's well-roundedness will carry him through this fight, and I do think his striking is slightly better than Max Griffin, so I'm going to go with Chris Curtis. I'm going to say by a decision. I might even say split decision. And now opening up the main card, we have Junior Tafa versus Tuco Tokkos. So Junior Tafa moving down and making his debut at light heavyweight for this fight, with his last win being at heavyweight against Sean Sharaf, where he did manage to end the fight with a TKO against the fence midway through the second round. He did lose the first round though very clearly, both in the striking but especially on the ground. With his wrestling takedowns not really existing in that fight, he got taken down easily, held on bottom. Before that, he lost to Valter Walker in somewhat of a controversial stoppage where Walker locked in the leg lock. I mentioned this before. Tafa screamed out pain. They stopped the fight. He was complaining about it. But either way, he was sort of losing that first round pretty evidently, especially through the wrestling and getting dominated on the ground. And even before that, he had a pretty unimpressive performance against Marcos Rogero de Lima, where he was getting beat up on the feet and then taken down the first. That whole round, he wasn't really winning. And then he got tagged with a heavy calf kick that whole round that eventually in the second led to him getting leg kick TKO'd. So his resume doesn't look amazing. Tuco Tokkos, only 2 fights within the UFC, with his first being against Umar Sy in a pretty bad debuting performance. He was constantly getting taken down and held down by Sy, before late in the first round being submitted while against the cage with a rear naked choke. He also lost his fight after that against Navajo Sterling, but admittedly Sterling is a really tricky opponent and a very solid fighter, so not the worst of losses, and there were points in this fight where he was giving Sterling a bit of resistance, both on the feet but also on the ground. Ultimately he lost that one by 30-27 decision, but it was pretty close, especially what people were thinking was going to happen in that fight with Sterling being sort of a knockout artist before then. Tuco's really brought some fight to him. And while I think Tokkos hasn't had the most amazing performances himself, I think the people he's fought are better than Tafa's resume. And I think that in this fight, he will have the advantage of this fight being at light heavyweight. And outside of that, I just think I can't pick Tafa reliably. He can be very on and off at times, and I can't reliably pick him to win any fight really, so I'm going to go with Tuco Tokkos by a round 2 submission. Next up the card we have Vitor Petrino versus Austen Lane. So Vitor Petrino most recently got brutally knocked out by Dustin Jacoby in a fight where up until the finish it was actually very low volume, very slow paced. The third was especially bad, very sloppy performance from both fighters. Both of them were visibly gassed out after the second round, but out of nowhere Jacoby lands a brutal straight right, lands directly on the chin of Petrino, puts him out cold. Before that, he took on Anthony Smith in a fight where, odds-wise, it appeared that he was going to absolutely run through Smith, but when he shot him for a takedown early in the first, Smith locked in a guillotine that he sort of stands up while stuck in and tries to slam Smith, sink himself deeper into it, forcing a tap. He lost that fight by a submission in the first round against a pretty average opponent in Smith. And while these two most recent losses look really, really bad, there was a time where Petrino was a formidable force within light heavyweight. He won his first 4 fights within the UFC, with a win over surging prospect in Tyson Pedro finishing that one off. In a pretty competitive bout that he actually managed to take through his takedowns and wrestling, especially in that third round. But yeah, that was a pretty impressive win. Austen Lane recently got slept badly when he took on Mario Pinto in the second round of their fight, where Pinto came out of nowhere, landed a brutal left hook that put Lane out bad. Admittedly, Lane was winning that first round, outstriking Pinto throughout the round, but knocked him down, once in that first round, but ultimately lost that one. Before that, he got a surprise upset over Rebellis to Spain, who previously lost to Waldo Cortez Acosta, and in that fight, Lane used the same sort of wrestling heavy approach that Acosta loves, winning a dominant decision through just taking Despain down and holding him there, removing his knockout power that he possesses. And while his wrestling is usually enough to keep the fights competitive and his striking is sort of enough to keep it safe on the feet, he does have a habit of keeping his chin in the air and creating these openings for getting caught with big shots, like he did against Gennady Deniz, where Lane won that first round dominantly through taking Deniz down and holding him there, but he got caught with a brutal left hook when pushed up against the cage that put him down and out badly, lost that fight. And while I think Lane's wrestling is very good and sort of what pulls him through most of his fights, Petrino had some pretty good takedown defense and some good wrestling of his own. So I think striking wise, I think Petrino will catch Lane at multiple points during this fight, and I think that at one point he will land big enough to end the fight. So for that reason, I'm going to go Vitor Petrino by a round 2 KO for this one. Next up is Nate Landwehr versus Morgan Charriere. So Landwehr coming off a pretty bad loss to Doohoo Choi at UFC 310 in a fight where Choi beat up on Landwehr all throughout the fight, used his takedown and wrestling to tie Landwehr out as the fight went on, and that ultimately culminated in a third round elbow ground and pound TKO for Choi, winning both rounds before that as well, so it was a very dominant performance for Choi. Before that though, Landwehr got a crazy first round knockout over Jamal Emmers, where after a round of getting beat up pretty badly, in the closing seconds of that round he lands an uppercut followed by a right hook that dropped Emmers, had him out bad. The ref stopped it after a few sort of follow-up hammer fists. Good win there. In his fight, I think that Landwehr's biggest weapon consistently is him landing big and landing hard in those first rounds. It's probably where it's the most dangerous, but there is a trade-off with that. He often sort of leaves himself open to emptying the gas tank in the first and letting the fight sort of run away from him as the rounds go on. Like his fight with Dan Ige, where as Landwehr looked really good in the start, he started to slowly slow down as the fight went on. Ige was landing big on Landwehr, especially in the later rounds, knocked him down the second. Took a pretty clear unanimous decision win for that one. Bad performance for Landwehr near the end. His opponent, Morgan Charriere, most recently lost to Nathaniel Wood in a fight that a lot of the community were calling a fraud check, and while it was a really bad loss for Charriere, getting knocked down in the first, and then throughout the fight he was just struggling with the wrestling from Woods, even lost on the feet at points. Woods took a 30-27 decision. I think this fight though reflected more how good Woods is over how bad Charriere is. In this fight against Gabriel Miranda before that, where he sort of gained most of his stardom, he took down and dominated Miranda on the ground for the whole first round, before in the second landing a brutal left hook 30 seconds into the round, dropped Miranda bad, had him out. Probably the best knockout of that card. And while before that he did lose to Shep Mariscal, Mariscal is surprisingly good, and he has a very, very impressive chin on him. You can't really finish the guy. And that fight ended with a split decision where Charriere won the second pretty clearly with his wrestling, but the first and third were really close swing rounds that Mariscal ended up taking both of them to win that split decision. But the first round I really thought could go either way. And while Landwehr is very dangerous in the striking, Charriere is well-rounded enough to sort of weather the storm, I think. And I think he'll throw in some takedowns and wrestling to slowly tire Landwehr down as the fight goes on, and then might pick up on the feet in the sort of later second and third rounds. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Morgan Charriere by round 3 KO. Next up is Calvin Kattar versus Steve Garcia. So Calvin Kattar had some pretty unimpressive performances as of late. His most recent fight against Yusuf Zalal was a really boring 3-round fight. With Kattar looking the best in the third, but even still, throughout the fight, he just let Zalal circle around on the outside and pick away at him from the back foot. With Kattar never really trying to engage in these risky exchanges, and as a result, he lost that one by a 29-28 unanimous decision. His fight before that was against Aljamain Sterling in Sterling's featherweight debut at UFC 300, and that was a pretty bad performance as well. Kattar lost that one just primarily through constantly being taken down. It was a pretty brutal matchup, with the striker in Kattar being matched up with a very skilled wrestler in Aljo. But regardless, Aljo took him down multiple times every round. Kattar wasn't able to get back to the feet throughout the fight and lost that one by a very dominant 30-27 decision. And Kattar hasn't won a fight since January of 2022, where he took on Giga Chikadze, and admittedly this was an amazing performance. In fact, I'd say this was probably one of the career highs of Kattar, and this was coming off the Max Holloway loss as well. But he took that one 50-45, and he was winning that one in every round on the feet. He was beating him in the striking, and even in the first 2 rounds he started mixing in some takedowns and even some submission attempts. And he even knocked Chikadze down in the 5th, so he sealed that very dominant decision, but since then hasn't really looked the same. His opponent, Steve Garcia, picked up a very, very impressive win streak recently, with his most recent win being over Carl Nelson, where he very quickly into the round, the fight got to the ground, and Garcia managed to reverse position to get on top and finish the fight in the first round via a ground and pound TKO. That actually won him a performance bonus. Before that, he took another performance bonus in his fight against Seungwoo Choi, where both fighters were sort of swinging wildly at each other out the gate. Garcia landed a series of hard shots and ended up actually dropping Choi, to which he followed up with a nasty ground and pound combination, finished the fight in the first round via TKO. His fight against Melchizedek Costa was a little bit different, with Garcia really struggling with the takedowns and grappling from Costa, but in the second, Garcia lands big early in the round, dropped Costa badly before trying to submit him, and eventually just resorting to the ground and pound that he's so good at, and won that one by a TKO win. And ultimately, this fight does come down to 2 things. For one, I just don't think Kattar is what he used to be. And he hasn't won a fight since 2022 and really isn't looking like he's improving as of his recent fights. And for 2, I think Garcia is incredibly skilled and a very solid opponent in all areas, with his takedown and grappling being the most dangerous things, and especially because it's sort of a starting point to him establishing this ground and pound TKO. Sort of, he does it throughout his fights. And I don't see Kattar putting up much of a threat on the ground either, so I think that will come pretty easy to him. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Steve Garcia by a round 1 TKO. And now on to the co-main event, Stephen Thompson versus Gabriel Bonfim. So Thompson had some very tough matchups recently, especially the competition he's been faced up with. He fought Joaquin Buckley at UFC 307 most recently, and in this fight, it was actually pretty close in the first 2 rounds. Buckley's very, very skilled, especially on the feet, and in this fight Buckley was losing in the striking and kind of struggling to deal with the range and reach of Thompson. He found success with his takedowns and wrestling, especially in the second, but the scorecards had it 1 apiece leading into the third. But in the third, Buckley blitzed in, backing Thompson up against the cage, and landed this right hook with a lot of momentum behind it, put Thompson down and out badly. He lost that one, but it was pretty close leading up to the finish. Before that, he did get put up against Shavkat Rakhmonov, an extremely dangerous prospect again. at UFC 296, where Thompson just lost the first through getting outstruck, but in the second he got taken down, to which Rakhmonov took his back, submitted him with a rear naked choke. Rakhmonov was just leagues above him when it came to the grappling, and he submitted him within the closing seconds of the second round. So very impressive win for Rakhmonov. Thompson looked decent in the first, but nothing outside of that. Despite these two most recent losses though, Thompson is a real threat if you let it stay on the feet. He demonstrated that against Kevin Holland in their 5-round fight, with Thompson getting outstruck and losing in the first before coming back in the second and third, outstriking Holland by a large margin and even doing some pretty big damage, especially with his kicks, with him almost finishing Holland in the closing seconds of the 4th round. But Holland went back to his corner called it off. I think Holland had like a broken hand or something, but regardless, even if it did go to decision, there's no way Holland could have taken it back unless he got like a 10-8 or a knockout. So Thompson won that one pretty clear. His opponent, Gabriel Bonfim, coming off a bonus winning performance against Chaos Williams, where the whole first round was spent on the ground, with Bonfim taking Williams down multiple times early in that round and almost submitting him early in the first. And after taking Williams down in the second, he was able to sink in a Darce choke that put Williams out badly. Bonfim won that one. Before that, he beat Ange Looser in a fight where surprisingly Looser was the one actually pushing the takedowns and wrestling, but it was of no use because Bonfim outstruck Looser badly every round and was able to defend most of Looser's takedown attempts throughout that fight, winning a 30-27 decision. And while in that fight his striking looked really good, there is somewhat of a limit to how far this would take him, with his fight against Nicholas Dalby ending late in the second round when Dalby got Bonfim up against a cage, landed a knee clean on the chin of Bonfim that put him down and out. And this was after a first round that Bonfim won through using takedowns and wrestling, and it looked like it was going the same way in the second, but he got caught up against the cage when trying to strike with Dalby, got put out. It is what it is. And while Bonfim is pretty solid on the feet, his main threat is when it gets taken to the ground. Thompson, though, has some pretty impressive takedown defense, so I think he's going to struggle to get Thompson down, especially with his karate stance, with him dipping in and out of range. It's often hard to shoot in and take the front leg because he'll sort of jump backwards whenever you try to, or kick you in the head. And for that reason, I think this one will sort of stay on the feet for the majority of the fight, to which I think Thompson will do a better job at out-voluming his opponent. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Stephen Thompson to win this one. I'm going to say by a decision win. And now the main event, Derrick Lewis takes on Tallison Teixeira. So, Derrick Lewis most recently took on Rodrigo Nascimento, who at the time was riding a 4-fight win streak, and coming into that fight was only really a slight underdog betting wise, so the bettors thought it was going to be a very close fight. And it did initially look like Nascimento was going to beat Lewis. Lewis lost that first round pretty clearly. But as the fight went on, Lewis slowly picked up on the feet in the second and especially early in the third, where he landed this overhand, followed up by some ground and pound, ended that fight, third round KO. Before that, Lewis lost a really bad decision loss to Jailton Almeida, where he got 50-45 by Almeida. Just primarily Almeida took him down every round, almost submitted him at multiple points during that fight. And just Lewis was unable to find an answer to it. He was unable to get back to the feet, which is strange because usually he just bucks people off. But to this one, Almeida was just holding him down, constantly keeping dominant positioning, landing the occasional ground and pound. But it was mainly just the submission threat that won him that one. But either way, very dominant decision loss for Lewis there. And at the end of the day, it's the first few rounds that mainly determine how Lewis performs in a fight. He's the most dangerous when the sort of fight opens up. And he demonstrated that with a win over Marcos Rorio de Lima at UFC 291, where in the first 30 seconds of the fight, Lewis landed a flying knee that was followed up by some ground and pound, finished the fight very early, and won a performance bonus for that one. So he is very dangerous when sort of the first 3 rounds, but outside of that, he does sort of falter a little bit. Tallison Teixeira, his opponent, only one fight within the UFC with his debut against Justin Tafa at UFC 312, and this was the most dominant fight of the card, I'd argue, with Teixeira getting Tafa up against the cage seconds into the fight, landing a brutal elbow straight across the face at Tafa that put him out cold, and Tafa didn't even land a single shot this fight, to tell you how sort of dominant a presence Tallison Teixeira is in the octagon. And while he does lack experience, especially within the UFC, and I think it's a really strange idea to take a 5-round fight after a 3-rounder against Justin Tafa where it finished early. But I don't see this fight going past maybe the 3rd round, to be honest with you, and I think it will ultimately be Teixeira's range that will give him the advantage in this fight, and I could see him sort of pressuring Lewis to a spot where he can find a clean shot and finish him, maybe in the 2nd or 3rd. But I do think a lot of people sort of sleep on Lewis and what he's done throughout his career, and this won't be the first time he's derailed an at the time dangerous up and coming prospect. So don't be surprised if Lewis pulls it off, but I have to go with Teixeira for this one, and I'm going to say that's going to be by a round 2 TKO. So that's it, guys. Those are all my predictions for UFC Fight Night Lewis versus Teixeira. Right now on the screen, all of my predictions, all of Cam's predictions. I need a resurgence. Hopefully this week I do good. This card, initially I actually kind of shit on it for being sort of a bad card, but upon looking at it again, man, there's some really sneaky good fights. I mean, we have Charriere back, we have Landwehr, we have Chris Curtis even on the prelims, which says a lot. We have Stephen Thompson, we have Calvin Kattar, Steve Garcia. There's just sort of these names that aren't massive currently, but they are very entertaining fighters. So I'm very excited to see how this one plays out. Next week, UFC 318 as well. So, I mean, I was going to say get excited for that, but recently we found out maybe not the best card on earth. But regardless, we'll see how this weekend turns out, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye!